Alpha King's bride, until the new maid threw her out of the ceremony. From the high towers of the Alpha King's castle, banners fluttered in the wind, each one black and silver, symbols of power that could strike fear into even the bravest soul. The courtyard bustled with servants, guards, and nobles, all preparing for a ceremony that the entire kingdom whispered about, the wedding of the Alpha King to Lady Seraphine, the bride everyone feared. Lady Seraphine was known across the lands for her sharp tongue, icy demeanor, and the air of authority that seemed to cling to her like a cloak. No one dared cross her. Even the bravest knights lowered their heads when she passed. And yet, beneath her perfection, there was a darkness. Whispers said she was connected to magic older than the kingdom itself, and some even believed that anyone who married her would be cursed. Alara, the new maid, watched the chaos from the servants' entrance. She had arrived only a week ago, quiet, unnoticed, carrying nothing but a small satchel and a determination that no one could see. She had heard the stories of the bride, the cruelty, the fear, the way Seraphine commanded the Alpha King's court with a cold smile. Alara, however, was not afraid. She did not understand why the court trembled at her presence. She only knew that injustice made her blood burn, and cruelty was something she could not ignore. The main hall of the castle was vast and intimidating. Its ceilings were high enough to touch the clouds, and the walls were lined with carved statues of past kings and queens, their eyes seeming to follow every move. Candles hung from golden chandeliers, casting a warm glow that reflected off polished marble floors. Servants rushed back and forth, carrying trays of flowers, arranging silver cups and whispering instructions to each other in anxious tones. At the far end of the hall, the Alpha King sat upon his throne, tall and silent. He was a man of shadows and storms, with dark hair that fell across his shoulders and eyes that seemed to see every secret, every lie, and every hidden thought. He did not smile, yet there was a strange magnetism about him, an aura of power that drew people in even as it terrified them. Lady Seraphine entered the hall with the grace of someone who had been trained her whole life to command attention. Her gown shimmered like liquid silver, and her crown sparkled under the candlelight. Every head bowed, every whisper hushed. She walked slowly, deliberately, letting her gaze sweep over the nobles, the servants, and the guards. Her eyes landed on Alara, and for a moment something flickered, surprise perhaps or unease, but it vanished as quickly as it came. The ceremony began. Music filled the hall, soft and haunting, weaving through the tension like a living thread. Seraphine raised her hand, commanding silence, and then, in a voice that was both smooth and sharp, she addressed the court. She reminded them of the power of the Alpha King, the glory of the kingdom, and the honor of witnessing a union that was meant to strengthen the realm. But her words were not kind. One noble family, accused of minor disloyalties in the past, became her target. She laughed lightly as she detailed their failures, each word cutting deeper than a sword. The family bowed, embarrassed and afraid, their faces pale under the candlelight. The court murmured approval, fearing the wrath of the bride more than the sting of her words. Alara could not stay silent. Something inside her demanded action. She stepped forward, her small frame unnoticed at first, and then cleared her throat. The room went still as all eyes turned toward the maid who dared to move against Lady Seraphine. "Lady Seraphine," Alara said, her voice calm but firm, "is it truly courage to humiliate those who cannot defend themselves? Or is it fear that guides your hand?" Gasps echoed through the hall. A maid daring to speak to the bride. A servant daring to question the noble Lady Seraphine. No one moved. Even the guards stiffened, unsure whether to intervene. Seraphine's eyes narrowed, a dangerous glint shining in them. "And who are you to speak of courage?" she hissed, stepping closer, her silver gown swishing against the marble floor. "A servant with no name, no rank, no power. You dare stand before me?" Alara did not step back. She met Seraphine's gaze directly, refusing to be cowed. "I may be a servant," she said, her voice steady, "but I can see the difference between strength and cruelty. The king deserves loyalty, not fear. The people deserve respect, not humiliation." A hush fell over the hall. The Alpha King's eyes, always so still, flickered with interest. He leaned forward slightly on his throne, observing the maid who dared defy his bride. Seraphine's lips pressed into a thin line, her composure cracking just enough to show the depth of her irritation. "You are bold, little maid," Seraphine said, her voice low and dangerous. "Bold and foolish. Do you think your words matter here? Do you think the Alpha King will hear you over the sound of your own audacity?" Alara swallowed, but she did not retreat. "If courage matters, yes. If honesty matters, yes. If fear rules, no." The tension in the room was unbearable. Nobles shifted in their seats, unsure where their loyalties should lie. Guards tightened their grip on their spears, anticipating an eruption. And then, with a movement as swift as a striking snake, Alara did something no one expected. She stepped forward, grasped the edge of Seraphine's gown, and using her strength and clever leverage, pushed the bride backward. The hall gasped. Seraphine stumbled, shrieked, and then tumbled across the marble floor. A hush fell over the room so complete that even the flickering candles seemed to pause. The Alpha King rose slowly, his dark eyes fixed on Alara. For the first time, no one dared breathe. Seraphine scrambled to her feet, fury radiating from her like fire. "How dare you?" she screamed, her voice high and sharp, echoing through the hall. "You will pay for this insolence." Alara's heart pounded, but she did not flinch. She stood tall, meeting Seraphine's glare without fear. "No," she said simply, "not today." The Alpha King's presence filled the room like a living storm. He did not speak, but the silence itself carried authority. He looked at Alara in a way that made everyone else feel invisible, as if she alone mattered in that vast, shadowed hall. For a moment, time itself seemed suspended. Then the king spoke, his voice deep, calm, and resonant. "Enough!" The court froze. Even Seraphine fell silent, her chest heaving with rage and disbelief. The king continued, his gaze shifting from Alara to the trembling bride. "This ceremony is over. You," he said to Seraphine, "will leave my hall immediately." The words sent a shockwave through the nobles. Lady Seraphine's pride, her power, and her reputation crumbled in a single breath. She stood frozen, eyes wide, unable to comprehend what had just happened. For the first time, she was not the one in control. Alara, meanwhile, felt a strange mixture of fear and triumph. She had acted boldly, and yet she knew that the king's interest carried weight far beyond the ceremony itself. The whispers in the court began anew, but now they were not of fear. They were of curiosity, admiration, and disbelief. As Seraphine stormed out of the hall, her silver gown trailing behind her, Alara felt the weight of the Alpha King's gaze on her. He approached slowly, each step measured and powerful until he stood before her. "You are braver than anyone I have ever known," he said, his voice low enough that only she could hear, "and perhaps more dangerous." Alara looked up at him, her chest still pounding, and met his stormy eyes. "Dangerous?" she asked, uncertain. "In a way that matters," he replied, and then he turned, his cloak sweeping behind him as he strode back to the throne. The room seemed to exhale, and the courtiers dared not move. Alara realized that she had stepped into a world of shadows and power far greater than she had imagined. She had challenged the feared bride, yes, but now she stood before a king whose secrets and storms were far more terrifying than any human adversary. And she understood, with a quiet thrill that raced through her veins, that this was only the beginning. Outside the hall, the wind howled through the castle towers. Seraphine's furious cries echoed through the corridors, mingling with the whispers of courtiers and the silent awe of those who had witnessed the impossible. Alara, still standing in the flickering candlelight, could feel the weight of the night settling around her. The Alpha King had not yet spoken of trust or alliance or danger, but he had looked at her, and that look carried promise, challenge, and a story yet to unfold. Ilara's heart thumped as she realized the truth. She had thrown the feared bride out of the ceremony, yes. But in doing so, she had stepped directly into a world of darkness, power, and a man whose secrets were as deep as the night sky. And she knew, with every pulse of her heart, that nothing would ever be the same again. The candles flickered, shadows danced along the walls, and the distant storm outside the castle whispered of trials, secrets, and the dangerous bond that was beginning to form between a king and a maid who dared to defy the impossible. The castle was unusually quiet the morning after the disrupted ceremony. The halls, usually alive with chatter and the clinking of armor, now carried only the soft shuffle of footsteps and the distant echo of Seraphine's fury. Even the guards moved with careful silence, as if the castle itself were holding its breath. Ilara walked through the grand corridors, carrying trays of fresh flowers for the Alpha King's chambers. Every corner, every shadow, seemed to watch her. Whispers followed her. Servants murmured her name, nobles glared from behind velvet curtains, and even some of the guards glanced with a mixture of curiosity and caution. She had done the impossible, challenged the feared bride, and survived. Yet she felt no triumph, only a tense anticipation, as if something far greater than Seraphine's wrath was already in motion. In the throne room, the Alpha King sat in silence, his gaze fixed on the flickering candlelight. Ilara approached cautiously, bowing her head. The king's eyes, sharp as storm clouds, followed her every step. She could feel the weight of his scrutiny, yet it was different from the bride's. It was not cold nor cruel. There was curiosity and perhaps something more dangerous, a challenge. "You acted boldly yesterday," he said, his voice low, carrying the power to command and the subtle undertone of amusement. "Few have the courage to speak truth in this hall, and fewer still to act upon it." Ilara kept her head bowed, careful to meet his gaze only when he allowed it. "I only did what was right," she said softly. "I could not watch injustice go unchallenged." The king leaned back, studying her with an intensity that made her heart beat faster. "Right is a matter of perspective," he said slowly. "Courage is rare, yes, but sometimes it is also dangerous. You must understand the world you have stepped into, Maid." Ilara lifted her chin slightly. "I understand more than you think, Your Majesty. I understand fear, and I do not bow to it." He regarded her for a long moment, and for the first time, a faint, almost imperceptible smile touched his lips. It vanished as quickly as it appeared, leaving the storm behind. "We shall see," he said simply. Then with a wave of his hand he dismissed her. But dismissal was not exile. Instead, it was a test. Ilara realized this as she moved away, her steps echoing on the marble floors. She had earned a place in the king's attention, and with it came scrutiny, danger, and opportunity. In the days that followed, Ilara settled into her new role. She was assigned closer to the king's chambers, not as a servant to fetch water or polish silver, but to assist in the small tasks only a trusted few could perform. Every interaction, every glance seemed to carry weight. The court watched her, and so did Seraphine, who had retreated to her own shadowed quarters, plotting revenge with a dark and silent fury. The palace, however, was more than walls and ceremonies. It was alive with whispers of secrets older than the kingdom itself. Ilara began to notice small signs, strange patterns carved into the doors, faint glowing symbols in the corners of rooms, and shadows that seemed to move with intention. She learned quickly that the Alpha King's power was not only in his command over men, but also in his connection to forces unseen. The air around him seemed charged, as if every step he took left traces of storm and fire behind. One evening, Ilara found herself in the gardens, carrying water for the plants. The moon was full, casting silver light across the hedges and fountains. She paused, sensing movement, a soft rustle of leaves, a whisper of magic. And then she saw him, the Alpha King walking among the shadows, his expression unreadable. "Alara," he said, his voice carrying softly through the night air. "You have courage, but courage alone is not enough. Do you understand the price of defiance in this castle?" She met his gaze without fear. "I understand that fear rules many hearts, but not mine." He studied her silently, and for a moment the storm in his eyes softened. "You are not like the others," he admitted. "You see more than most, and yet perhaps you understand less than you think. The palace hides many secrets, Maid. Some are dangerous, and some can consume you entirely." Alara felt the weight of his words. "Then I will learn," she said simply. "I will not hide nor run. I will face what comes." A faint smile tugged at the corner of his lips, almost ghostly. "We shall see," he repeated, this time softer, almost contemplative. Then he turned and disappeared into the shadows, leaving her alone with the soft rustle of leaves and the whisper of the wind. The days passed, and tension in the palace grew. Seraphine, furious at her public humiliation, began to make subtle moves. She whispered poison into the ears of nobles, manipulated alliances, and hinted at dark powers she might unleash. Alara knew her presence in the palace had stirred something far more dangerous than mere jealousy. Seraphine's cruelty was a mask for ambition, and ambition in the hands of someone connected to ancient magic could be deadly. Yet the Alpha King remained silent, watching and testing. There were moments when their paths crossed, brief touches while passing in corridors, shared glances across the throne room, words exchanged under the pretense of instruction or duty. Every interaction carried tension, a mixture of respect, curiosity, and unspoken recognition. The king seemed intrigued by her fearlessness, and Alara began to sense that beneath his stern exterior, there was longing for a connection beyond power, beyond duty, beyond fear. One night, the castle trembled. A sudden darkness fell over the northern wing, as if the walls themselves shivered. Torches flickered and shadows danced in strange patterns across the corridors. Alara, carrying candles to the king's chambers, heard whispers that were not human, a hiss of something old and angry, moving with intent. She ran, guided by instinct and a strange awareness she could not explain. In the throne room, she found the king surrounded by a shadowy figure, its form shifting, intangible yet threatening. The guards froze, unable to act. The creature's eyes gleamed with malice, and it lunged toward the king. Without thinking, Alara stepped forward, placing herself between the king and the shadow. She remembered the small charm she had seen in the gardens, the protective runes carved into the stone. Gripping the nearest candlestick, she struck at the darkness, and to her surprise it recoiled, hissing, retreating like a cornered animal. The king's eyes widened, and for the first time he moved swiftly, placing a hand on her shoulder. The air between them crackled with unseen energy. "You are remarkable," he breathed, his voice tight with tension and something else, something closer to admiration or perhaps awe. Alara looked at him, her chest heaving. "I will not let harm come to you," she said firmly. "Not if I can stop it." The shadow dissolved into the corners of the room, leaving only the faint echo of its presence. Silence fell, broken only by the sound of their breathing. The Alpha King studied her closely, his stormy eyes searching, weighing, and something softening. "You have risked much for me," he said finally, his voice low, intimate. "And yet you do not tremble. You are fearless, Maid, or foolish." Alara held his gaze. "I am neither," she said simply. "I am myself. That is all I can be." For a long moment the two stood in the candlelight, the castle around them alive with whispers and shadows. The bond between them, fragile and unspoken, had begun to form. There was tension, yes, but also trust, a rare trust, born of courage and shared danger. And yet the threat was not gone. Seraphine's schemes continued in silence. Rumors spread through the castle, of dark magic and curses, of unseen alliances forming in the shadows. Every step Alara took was watched, every word measured. The palace itself seemed to conspire against them, its ancient stones holding secrets older than any living soul within its walls. The night grew deeper. Elara returned to her small quarters, but sleep did not come easily. Her thoughts were alive with images of the shadow, the king, and the dangerous world she had entered. She realized that her simple courage had placed her in a web of power, magic, and desire far beyond her imagining. Yet despite the fear, there was a spark, a thrill at the unknown, at the connection she could not yet name, at the challenge of facing darkness with the king by her side. At the same time, in her hidden chambers, Seraphine seethed. She could feel her influence slipping, her power undermined by a mere maid. Her eyes gleamed with anger, and her fingers traced the edges of dark spells she had long hidden. "You will not last," she whispered to the shadows. "I will see to it that you fall, little maid. And the king, he will remember who holds true power in this castle." Elara sensed the coming storm, the shadows gathering in corners, the unseen forces moving against her, but she was not afraid. She had thrown the bride from the ceremony, survived the night, and stood before the Alpha King unbroken. The path ahead was dangerous, yes, but she was ready to face it, one step at a time. The moonlight faded, and the first hints of dawn touched the towers. Elara knew that the palace, the king, and even Seraphine were only the beginning. Darkness waited, yes, but so did courage, loyalty, and a bond that had begun in the heart of the storm. The castle was awake before the sun rose, its towers catching the first faint light of dawn. Inside, the halls were alive with tension. Servants hurried past doors, whispers ricocheted off stone walls, and the air itself seemed thick with anticipation. The disrupted ceremony had left ripples that no one could ignore. Elara walked through the corridors, her heart steady, though she knew that the day ahead would test her in ways she had never imagined. Seraphine's defeat at the ceremony had not broken her. She had retreated to her hidden chambers, plotting, gathering her strength, and weaving dark whispers into the ears of those who would listen. Even the nobles who had feared her began to feel her influence, subtle yet potent, creeping through the castle like a shadow. Elara's connection with the Alpha King had grown in quiet moments, small gestures, and unspoken understanding. They moved through the halls like a storm contained within calmness, glances shared, hands brushing briefly while arranging documents or candles, words exchanged with hidden meaning. The king's presence was as commanding as ever, yet now there was an undercurrent of something softer, something rare and fragile: trust. The Alpha King summoned Elara to the throne room. When she arrived, he was already waiting, standing tall, his eyes scanning the horizon through the great windows. Behind him, banners swayed gently in the morning light, shadows shifting as if alive. "There are forces in this castle," he said without turning, his voice low, deliberate. "Forces older than the kingdom, older than any living soul. Seraphine is clever, but she is not the only danger. The palace itself remembers, and it does not forgive easily." Elara stepped closer, her gaze steady. "I am not afraid," she said. "I have faced her. I can face anything that comes." The king finally turned, his stormy eyes fixing on her. "Courage is admirable," he said softly, "but wisdom is rarer. You must learn to see what cannot be touched, hear what cannot be spoken, and act when the moment demands it. The shadows are patient, but they are watching you now." Elara nodded. She felt the weight of his words, the gravity of what was at stake. The castle was not merely stone and mortar. It was alive, filled with power, danger, and secrets waiting to be uncovered. That night, the air changed. A cold wind blew through the towers, rattling the doors and stirring the curtains. Elara moved quietly through the halls, guided by instinct. She could feel Seraphine's presence somewhere in the shadows, her power twisting through the walls, seeking to challenge her. The confrontation came suddenly. In the northern wing, a figure emerged from the darkness, cloaked in a shimmer of shadow and malice. It was Seraphine, her eyes glowing faintly, her hands carrying a subtle magic that made the air crackle with energy. "You think you have won," she hissed, her voice slicing through the silence. "You are nothing but a maid. This castle belongs to me, and the king will remember who is his rightful queen." Alara stood firm. "The castle belongs to no one who rules with fear," she said. "And the king is not yours to claim." Seraphine laughed, a sound that made the walls seem to shiver. "Bold words," she said, "for someone who knows nothing of power." With a swift movement, she sent a surge of energy toward Alara, a shadowy force that twisted the air itself. But Alara was ready. She had seen the signs in the gardens, the protective runes etched into hidden corners, the charms the king had once shown her. She raised her hands and called upon the knowledge she had learned, the instincts she had honed in the days since the ceremony. The surge of energy met her shield and recoiled, hissing in frustration. The king appeared suddenly, his presence filling the corridor with an overwhelming force. He placed a hand on Alara's shoulder, steadying her, and together they faced Seraphine. "This ends now," he said, his voice echoing like a distant storm. Seraphine's eyes widened, not in fear but in disbelief. She had not expected the king to stand beside the maid, united, unbroken, unshaken. Her power faltered, and in that moment Alara acted. Using both wit and courage, she disarmed Seraphine's magic, channeling the energy away from the king and herself, turning the force back upon its source. Seraphine staggered, her fury clashing with her own dark power, until finally, with a cry that echoed through the halls, she was forced to retreat, disappearing into the shadows she had once called home. Silence fell, broken only by the sound of their breathing. The corridor was dim, but the air was charged with something new: triumph, relief, and the first true recognition of a bond that had been forged through fire, courage, and shared danger. The king turned to Alara, his expression unreadable but softened, touched by a hint of admiration. "You have done what few could," he said quietly. "You have faced darkness not with fear but with strength and wisdom. You are remarkable." Alara lowered her gaze, a faint blush touching her cheeks. "I did what I had to," she said simply. "Not for praise, but for what is right." He studied her, his stormy eyes searching, as if trying to read every thought and emotion that passed through her mind. For a long moment, they simply stood together, two forces who had met and tested one another, bound now by something neither could deny. The castle itself seemed to exhale, the shadows retreating into corners, the walls no longer threatening but alive with quiet energy. The threat of Seraphine was not gone, she would return, but the balance had shifted. Courage, loyalty, and truth had won, at least for now. Days turned into nights, and the Alpha King and Alara continued to navigate the delicate dance of power and trust. They walked together through the gardens, discussed strategies to protect the kingdom, and learned to read the unspoken signals of each other. Every shared glance carried tension, longing, and understanding. Every silent moment was charged with the potential of something deeper. And yet, danger always lingered. Seraphine's influence had not vanished entirely. Rumors spread that she sought allies among the nobility, that she had delved into older, darker magic, and that her ambition could no longer be contained. The castle, alive with secrets, seemed to whisper warnings in every shadow. One evening, as the sun set behind the distant mountains, the king led Alara to the highest tower. From there, the entire kingdom spread out beneath them, bathed in gold and shadow. The wind whipped through their hair, and the air carried the scent of distant storms. "You have changed the course of this kingdom," he said softly. "Not by your rank, not by your blood, but by your courage. You have shown me that there is more to life than fear, and more to power than command." Alara looked at him, her heart stirring. "I could not let fear rule you or the people. You deserve better than obedience born of terror." He reached for her hand, a simple gesture yet charged with significance. "And yet you have given me something far greater than obedience," he said, his voice low and intimate. You have given me trust, companionship, perhaps even something that neither of us expected." Elara felt the weight of his words, the storm in his eyes softening into something warmer, something human. She realized then that their bond had become unbreakable, forged through courage, peril, and shared understanding. But even in that quiet, powerful moment, the castle reminded them that peace was fleeting. A distant whisper of wind carried a warning, a shadow flickered at the edge of the tower, and the memory of Seraphine's ambition lingered like a stain upon the walls. They had won this battle, but the struggle for the kingdom, for trust, and for hearts untainted by fear was far from over. That night, Elara returned to her quarters, her thoughts alive with the day's events. She understood that her life had changed forever. She was no longer just a maid. She was a participant in the destiny of the kingdom, a guardian of its secrets, and a companion to a king whose heart had begun to soften because of her courage. Sleep came at last, though uneasy, filled with visions of shadows and storms. She knew that challenges would come again, that Seraphine would not rest, and that the path of courage was never easy. Yet she also knew, deep in her heart, that she would face whatever came with the same resolve that had carried her through the ceremony, the shadow attack, and the tests of the palace. The dawn broke over the castle, golden light spilling across towers and battlements. In the throne room, the Alpha King stood alone for a moment, gazing out at his kingdom. His expression was softer, more human than anyone had ever seen, yet his eyes still held storms within them. When Elara arrived, he turned, and for the first time he smiled, not the faint ghost of a smile, but a true, human expression of warmth. "The kingdom is safe for now," he said, "thanks to you." Elara felt a thrill of both pride and humility. "We are only as strong as those who stand together," she said. He nodded, his gaze lingering on her, the weight of unspoken words hanging in the air. "Together," he agreed, and in that moment the castle seemed alive with quiet promise. Shadows might stir and dangers might arise, but the bond between the Alpha King and the maid who had dared defy fear had been forged in fire, courage, and truth. They were no longer merely ruler and servant. They were allies, partners, and perhaps something more, standing on the edge of a world that was theirs to protect and to shape. The storm outside rumbled faintly, a reminder that the future held challenges. But for now, in the golden light of dawn, hope and trust had conquered fear. The kingdom had witnessed courage, and the Alpha King had learned the power of respect, loyalty, and the unbreakable spirit of one maid who refused to bow.